It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Not since the beer hall putsch has a speech in Munich caused such absolute disarray in Germany and across the European Union, and of course in their satrapy of London. jdvance. It was a St. Valentine's Day massacre of the vanities. It was the slaughter of sacred cows that have sustained the so-called special relationship since the end of the Second World War. The United States made clear who is boss, and that boss is Donald Trump. And 12 o'clock on Saturday came and went, and all hell did not break loose in Gaza. What's become of the cockamamie real estate deal whereby one Donald Trump becomes the owner of the internationally recognized occupied territory of the Gaza Strip? That and much more coming up tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Little Napoleon Emmanuel Macron has called a summit of the important EU leaders in Paris tomorrow. The fallout continues from the extraordinary performance of the US Vice President J.D. Vance, who slayed them all in his speech in Munich. He slayed them on multiple levels. He told them to stop complaining about Russia and China. Your main enemy is at home, he said. Your leaders who have destroyed the European spirit, who have destroyed European civilization, who have destroyed freedom of speech and destroyed democracy. You are your own worst enemies, said J.D. Vance, and how right he was. The people of Europe were cheering from the rafters but the leaders of Europe went into what can only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. The yapping chihuahuas of the so-called Baltic states, well, they were ready to march to Kiev with their entire armed forces. Maybe in single file, it would have looked more impressive. But the German government went completely bananas. I say German government, though Germany actually doesn't really have a government at this point in time, and those who pretend to be its government are about to be swept away in a landslide defeat in the general election in Germany in just a few days' time. We'll be talking to one of the candidates from Hamburg, from the Sarah Wagenknecht faction, who is contesting a seat in that election in just an hour or so. But the French government too, and perhaps particularly, worst of all, as you might have expected, was Keir Starmer, the sub-Churchillian mutt who runs the United Kingdom. I say runs, but the only thing that's running in the United Kingdom is us running into the ground. The only person less popular on the entire European electoral and political stage would be Macron and Scholz. But between the three of them, they could barely muster 30% of public opinion behind them. And that's all three of them put together. The truth is that Keir Starmer's vainglorious pledge that Britain will ensure that Ukraine joins NATO after the leader and mainstay of NATO, the United States, has declared that Ukraine will never join NATO, is an indication that Keir Starmer has taken leave of his senses. He has declared war not only on Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation, but Donald Trump and the United States of America. This in a country rapidly going bankrupt. This in a country facing an almighty recession. This in a country whose old people are shivering through a cold winter without even the minimal benefit of the cold weather allowance that they were formerly paid, which was axed to give the entire money and more to Volodymyr Zelensky. This man is the head of a country whose armed forces would have comfortably fit into the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium this afternoon, with room for a lot of double-decker buses behind both goals. This is a man whose Royal Navy has been run down to the point of parody. This is a man who cannot recruit or retain soldiers. This is a man who only has nuclear weapons. That's when they are working. That's when the submarines are not snarled up in Faslane. And that's, of course, dependent on the United States agreeing to allow the British to fire what are effectively joint-controlled nuclear weapons. And, of course, firing our nuclear weapons at Russia means national extinction within the next 12 minutes. A rather Pyrrhic victory, one might say. But all in all, the European leaders are in a state of total panic. Some of you laughed at me when I said on here, 12 months or so ago, maybe less, that Article 5 was a fake barrier, a fake balustrade on which we were stood. The idea that the Americans would risk intercontinental ballistic nuclear hypersonic war to defend, I don't know, Belgium or Poland or Britain was utterly fanciful. If limited nuclear war broke out in Europe, you wouldn't see the Americans for the smoke. The Americans would be back home on the hotline, bringing about an end to the hostilities. I said that to you, and many people mocked me. Everybody now knows that this is true. Everybody now knows that the United States is on its way out of Europe. And the cacophony of complaints from European leaders almost took the form of a European uprising against American hegemony. I've been waiting for it all of my life. The only problem is the Europeans are wrong and the Americans are right. The idea that we can beat the Russian army. I've just been watching, as is my wont because I like the ending, the Second World War documentary on Netflix. The idea that Russia can be defeated by Ukraine was always a blatant, self-serving lie. Yet every politician in Western countries and every journalist and broadcaster repeated that lie ad nauseum, almost as if they themselves believed it. And maybe they did. That's the class of journalists and broadcasters and politicians that we have in our countries today. But the anti-American uprising is an uprising in favor of more and more and more war. The anti-American uprising in Europe today is an uprising against peace. Can you believe it? I mean, I know we're in an era of cross-dressing, but the so-called center and even the so-called left are demanding more war, and Donald Trump is demanding peace and a peace dividend. Trump went on to say he had proposed in his phone call to Putin a cut in the nuclear arsenals of America, Russia, and China of 50%. Did you see CND celebrating? Did you see Stop the War waving their flags? Did you see anybody recognizably on the center left or from the old peace movement, as it was called? Did you see any of them hail Trump's idea? Trump said that he wanted new agreements, new treaties, a cut of 50% in nuclear weapons, and significant drawdown in forces on both sides of the divide in Europe. What's wrong with that? How could anybody be against that? Well, they are against it. All over Europe, they're holding a summit in Paris tomorrow to try and block it, but they cannot block it. Because, as I've said to you so often, the European Union and Britain are in exactly the same place as Mussolini used to be in the 1930s, going around the world threatening people with Germany's army. We go around the world threatening people with America's army. But America's army isn't coming. In fact, it's leaving the European theater. Hallelujah! No? Isn't that a wonderful thing? Now, I just want to make it clear to some of the critics out there. We will support Donald Trump when he's right, and we will oppose Donald Trump when he's wrong. What is wrong with that? And the idea that one should automatically oppose anything that Trump says or does, that one should automatically support anything that Biden and Harris or whoever now is in power in the Democratic Party, along with their liberal media, how could anyone agree, intellectually agree, that that is the right thing to do? And we will not do it. One of my biggest monologues in recent times was my denunciation of Trump's ridiculous, unhinged, completely berserk plan to buy and then to dispense with buying, merely to declare ownership of the Gaza Strip and the ethnic cleansing of 2.3 million Palestinian people. I denounced it in withering terms. His statement that if all the so-called hostages, actually prisoners, unless the Palestinian prisoners are also hostages, one can't be a prisoner and the other a hostage. They're both a prisoner or they're both hostages. And he said at the beginning of the week that all hell would break loose at noon on Saturday, that the war would begin again if all of the hostages, all of the prisoners were not released. Not in dribs and drabs, he said, but all of them. Well, 3 of them were released according to the terms of the ceasefire agreement he boasted about just a couple of weeks ago as having been his first achievement. But all hell didn't break loose. Donald Trump hasn't broken ground on a new Trump Tower on the Gaza Strip. And so again, I say to you, again, what's important is not what Donald Trump says, but what Donald Trump does. He says all kinds of things, like a braggart in a bar, like Tony Soprano. He says a lot of things. Many of the things he says are just garbage. But the end result has been that the ceasefire in Gaza is still intact, more or less, despite the usual atrocities committed during ceasefires by the Israeli side, as has been the case in every ceasefire. But the prisoners are being released according to the deal that Trump says was his deal. Now, as long as that continues, as long as no attempt is made to place 2 million Palestinians on ships or cattle trucks or to drive them into the Sinai desert, then we're actually better off than we were under the Biden-Harris administration, which gave everything that Netanyahu asked for and did nothing to try to bring about an end to the slaughter. I don't know about you. I'm not sure that I could even psychologically bear, to go back to the time of a week or 2 ago when every time you opened your telephone you saw another little child massacred, completely desecrated, completely mutilated, saw another woman lying dead in the street. I, myself, can hardly bear to think of the idea of going back to those days. So far, so good. If not good, then not as bad as the rhetoric would have led you to believe. So I'm still saying that Trump, with his plugs being pulled all over Europe, the lights going out all over Europe, the lights of a foolish folly, whereby the Europeans thought that by slavish obedience to American presidents they had earned themselves the right to expect eternal American protection in Europe. Now they are saying for Paris tomorrow they need a European security policy. I agree with that. The Europeans, including the UK, need a security policy. Here is what that security policy should be. A pan-European security pact doesn't need to be an organization. It needs to be a pact which offers security to all in Europe and insecurity to none. That means Russia must be a part of that security agreement. What would be wrong with that? Putin asked for that 25 years ago. Putin asked for it in Munich 17 years ago, in the last great speech that was made in that city. He told them what Russia's red lines were, and he told them the way to avoid the kind of conflict which has now bled us all white and bled the Ukrainian nation red and put 1 million Ukrainians in an early grave. And his plan is the right plan. include us in the security pact, include us in security guarantees, us to you, you to us, and there is no need to spend trillions of dollars and oceans of blood to bring about what in the end is a Pax Russiana. The Russians have already won this war, but they are not stopping it. They will continue to advance and advance and advance until an agreement is reached. And that means the liberation of great Russian cities like Odessa. It means the conquering of the seaboard on the Black Sea, so that the Black Sea can never be a NATO lake, which threatens the security of the Russian people. Lastly, Kellogg's Rice Krispie or Kellogg's Flake, General Kellogg, he says that they are going to try and detach Russia from China. You might as well be chasing moonbeams. You are living in cloud cuckoo land if you think that having created this great, mighty, prosperous Eurasian landmass and turned it into a world beater economically and militarily, that Russia is going to accept the blandishments of a Western European and North American continent who couldn't be trusted in any circumstances, always to do what they promised to do. We're going to Gaza, where our first guest is Abubaker Abed, a renowned Palestinian journalist and commentator, although he's a very young man indeed. He's a star about to be born on the mother of all talk shows right now. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got that on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Now, you get that film and our earlier film, The Killings of Tony Blair, completely free, gratis, when you support us, support the mother of all talk shows, support me and Gayatri and our media work through Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. and you get those films absolutely free. We've got a poll as usual. Is Zelensky finished? Again, another question that you would have thought belonged in the drawer with do bears defecate in the woods? But on Twitter, again, interestingly, 5,821 people voted on X, and 53% of them said Zelensky is not finished. Now that tells you a number of things. It tells you, first of all, that Elon Musk's X is not as straight as he likes to pretend that it is. Some things are amplified to certain people on X, and other things are repressed to certain people on X. Tells you, secondly, that only 5,821 people voted, and only half of them voted, 53% of them voted for Zelensky. That means the dead strength of NATO, now that its money's been cut off, now that the corgis of NATO, now that the savages of Boko Haram, now that every terrorist group in the world that was sucking at the teat of USAID, now that David Miliband has lost his $1.2 million a year job as the head of a charity supported by USAID, now that all the money has been cut, NAFO are down to about 2,500 people dead strength. Thirdly, it tells you they're so stupid that they think the poll is only running on Twitter, when in fact, as every week, it's running on multiple platforms. And thus you'll see the difference in the results so far. Is Zelensky finished? On Telegram, 96% say yes, 4% say no. On X, on Twitter that is, 47% say yes and 53% say no. But on the YouTube community poll, 18,000 people have voted, 92% yes, 8% no. And on the YouTube stream where you may be watching us right now, 95% say yes, 5% say no. Let's get that poll well over 30,000 votes by the end of the night. Vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. Vote on my X, my Twitter. Vote on the YouTube community poll, or vote on the YouTube stream. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 966 2625. Now, I promised you this young man, an heroic and brilliant young journalist and commentator from Gaza, Abubaker Abed, joins us now. We are very happy indeed. Many of us have been following your work for some time, Abubaker. It's wonderful to see you on the screen. Give us, first of all, a situation report. Describe the atmosphere and the multiple problems that you are now having to deal with in the aftermath of the genocidal frenzy that you've been through over the last 16 months.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for having me first. So just to tell you more about the situation, there are still many drones buzzing overhead. I'm here in the north of the Strip. I'm originally from Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. But today I've come here to do some reporting, but unfortunately the situation is literally dire. People are still crammed in very dilapidated places. They don't have phones. They don't have any tents, any caravans, because Israel has been banning the entry of those very much needed dwellings. At the same time, this is just a time where people cannot find enough water, enough food, specifically water. They need to walk in meters to get some liters of water, which is absolutely dehumanizing for them. and the sources available here for them are not enough. They are scant. And what people are doing is just trying to cope with the situation with no life means at all. And for children in particular who are still stranded in tents and uninhabitable shelters, they don't have any solutions. It's so cold here in Gaza, and people do not have blankets, do not have mattresses, and even the children themselves who have been through a lot during the last 14 months only have one piece of clothing on their bodies. When we talk about this, we talk about an endless trauma for those children. Most of the children have been newly orphaned because of Israel's genocide. Most of the children, if not all of them, have many tragedies to recount, and they cannot really forget about the pain they have been through. And for me, it's the same. Nothing is different to every single one here in Gaza. But overall, what people are thinking about is that they're just determined and adamant to rebuild what was devastated in their neighborhoods. They're so connected with this land. They are really loving everything about it. I'm seeing signs of hope, signs of vibrancy around me, that people have rebuilt their shops, they have reopened their markets, their shops as well. And many makeshift stalls are dotting the streets at the moment. And just people are trying to get to a sense of normality that they were used to before October the 7th. But of course, like, there was also an Israeli siege on Gaza before October the 7th and for 17 years. But because we really went from a very dark time to a darker time during the genocide, we really yearned for the pre-war time or the pre-genocide time. But it is still, Israel is still violating the ceasefire. It has killed 3 people on the ground in eastern Rafah early in the morning. And the 3 who were killed were police officers trying to secure the delivery of aid, but they were deliberately killed by a drone strike in Rafah. But unfortunately, what people are thinking about at the moment is that they really cannot move safely around because Israel can bomb them at any time, because Israel has killed around 100 people since the ceasefire took effect, and more than 820 have been wounded. And this is just an outright violation of the ceasefire. How can we really handle such an incredibly devastating time where people don't have anything but just piles of rubble everywhere, and no heavy vehicles have been allowed at all, no needed devices and tools to remove the rubble and clear up the rubble and sweep up the streets have also been given the permit to enter Gaza. So how people can really do or restart a new life if Israel continues violating the ceasefire, continues breaching the ceasefire, and not allowing any aid in an attempt to ethnically cleanse Gaza and the entirety of the Strip. It's completely horrifying and something unbearable for me and every single one in Gaza. But again, we're just a very united people. We have the spirit, the backbone, and the determination, and the hope to make Gaza beautiful again.
That's the bone that sticks in the throat of Donald Trump and Netanyahu, isn't it? They did everything that they could in the previous American administration, and for decades in the form of Netanyahu and the various coalitions that he's led, they did everything from siege to slaughter to break the will of the Palestinian people to remain on their land. Even today, the Israelis are saying that they are beginning an operation for voluntary transfer out of the Gaza Strip. They don't say to where. They can only mean to the Sinai, because that's the only place they could force to accept them. They could just break down the doors at Rafah and drive the people through. But they didn't factor in something which I have seen so many times with my own eyes in Gaza. They didn't factor in that no matter what, the people will not leave their land again. How do you account for that?
Yeah, Look, you cannot really change anything for Gazans because everyone here feels that Gaza is a part of their life. Gaza is their lives. And for everyone, from the children to the elderly, Gaza has always been our main haven, and we cannot really find any alternatives at all across the globe. Even if we are given all sources of luxury, even if we are given all ways to live the most beautiful life in the world, Gaza is our land. This is our home. And for us, there is no home except Gaza. How can you really take us out of the strip? Because what we have been enduring, the pain, the sweat, the tears, the blood that we have been paying, that we have been sacrificing over the course of the genocide, and not only the genocide, even more than beyond the genocide, all of that cannot really be replaced by such a disgraceful action or a call out to ethnically cleanse the entire strip. We cannot really agree on that. We cannot really accept it at all. And whatever will happen, because we've been enduring 14 months of genocide, exterminating people, starving them, and even deliberately and mass murdering them. And we did not really surrender at all. So even if this war is, which is something I really hope not, even if this war will continue, we have no other choices except staying in Gaza, because the 1.7 million people stranded here will define not only the future of Gaza, but they will also define and identify the future of the entire Palestinian occupied territories. And for us, we believe that what we have paid over the course of the genocide in particular will lead and will usher in the liberation of the occupied Palestine. That's why we know and we understand the importance and the significance of our resilience at this time. We understand the steadfastness and the resistance that we have been showing, because all of what we have been enduring is the purest form of resistance, it is everything that we really had, and just the first step until we really get back to our land. We know that we are still refugees inside Gaza, and that we have hometowns in the occupied Palestinian territories, which the Israelis took from us during the past years, specifically since the Nakba started in 1948. But we will continue to resist, we will continue to hope until we make sure that our land is going to be free again, no matter what the Israelis are going to do. You cannot really beat a people who love their land to the core. You cannot really beat a people whose land means the world to them, and they cannot really find peace, comfort, tranquility, or any of those great sensations. We cannot really find them anywhere except in Gaza, because that's what we have paid. That's what we will pay even tomorrow and after tomorrow. And what I've been hearing from people is that they will sacrifice their lives, because they will sacrifice until the very last breath. And that is just an indicator of how strong the bravery and the courage of the Palestinian people. If every single one of them, whatever Trump says, no matter what he says, no matter what he really wants to do with the Gazans and the ultimatums that he has been declaring against the Palestinian people, he cannot beat us, because our spirit, the spirit that we've been showing, the unity and the union that we have been displaying to the outside world is much, much stronger than just a few words and a few statements coming against Gaza, because this is not the first statement we saw. Statements coming from the Israeli leaders, from other corrupt leaders from across the world, that they wanted to wipe out Gaza, that they wanted to kill every single one in Gaza, and they have been trying that under the auspices of almost the entire world to wipe out the entire Gaza Strip. However, we continued enduring, we continued hoping, and we stayed rooted here, and then a ceasefire came. So if this war is going to be resumed, and if there are going to be, or there are many more wars to come, and I know that there are going to be more wars, we will not surrender, because we will reach the final destination, which is to see our original hometowns and to see the entire occupied Palestine free again. And if it is not going to be our time, it's going to be the time of the next generations, because that's what we have vowed to ourselves, that we will sacrifice our lives until the very last one to make sure that the younger generations and the next generations, Palestinian generations, are going to live freely and happily in a free Palestine. And the meaning of this is the liberation of not only Palestine, because we are physically occupied, but we are mentally not occupied, against what the word is about, because the word is mentally occupied but physically free. But we are going to be mentally and physically free, inshallah, very, very soon. Until the very last moment, we will continue fighting back against this brutal Israeli occupation.
Now, you talked about how grim, dire, you called it, the situation is for the people now that the bombs are not falling in the way that they were. People are trying to reconstruct some kind of life, but they lack food, they lack water, they lack materials, and so on. The ceasefire agreement required the entry into Gaza of a given number of trucks every day, and required the entry into Gaza from Egypt through the gate of Rafah, the means of life for the Palestinian people there. Are you saying that that part of the ceasefire agreement is not being implemented?
Yeah, of course, because again, this is just a part of the ethnic cleansing scheme Israel, under the auspices of the US, is trying to implement in Gaza, because they want to conquer Gaza. It has never been about Hamas. It has never been about the political parties, because you cannot really tell me or convince the world that the 20,000 children who have been killed during the genocide were Hamas or had any political affiliations, apart from the fact that women were killed. More than 13,000 women were killed. So what about them? Because this has been, from the very first day, a war against Palestinians. Nothing political in this context at all. But again, what we are seeing on the ground is contrary to what the ceasefire has been, or what the ceasefire framework is about, and it's just like it just continues like this. We've been reporting the entry of some of the trucks, but when it comes to mobile homes, to makeshift tents and maybe on caravans and containers, for example, which are desperately needed for the Palestinian people, we haven't seen a surge of them. We have only seen just a trickle of those much needed mobile homes and caravans inside Gaza, because Israel has not allowed that. And even Benjamin Netanyahu just stated probably a couple of days ago that he would not allow the entry of caravans into Gaza. But when you look at it, when you are trying to conclude something from this decision made by Netanyahu, you cannot really conclude anything except that he is a genocidal maniac, because you cannot really imagine that there is a people who want, or who doesn't want to allow caravans, allow mobile homes to the people who have lost their homes during the genocide, even though they didn't have any political affiliations and their homes were destroyed and are gutted out of no reasons. Who does that except someone with a mental illness, with absolutely no humanity at all? This is just about the morality of the Israeli people. And even we saw how the Palestinian hostages are dealt with and how are the Israeli captives are dealt with. There is a totally different picture between the two types of detainees. You cannot really imagine what has happened to the Palestinian people. Just yesterday, I was around in the place where the Palestinian detainees arrived, and I just saw horrific accounts. I still remember, I'm very, very heartbroken by this. I cannot really forget about it. One of the detainees was taken from Gaza. He doesn't have any political affiliations at all. He was taken brutally and arrested brutally from inside Gaza. Those are the ones who stayed in the north of the Strip, And then he was taken, he was tortured, and he was just kept in a cave like animals. How, like, who does this with those people? And then he just came, he was so happy, he showed his happiness, he exchanged the smiles and laughter with his family. He couldn't believe that he was freed, because he knows from the very first time, he knew from the very first time, in the very first glance, that he would not see the daylight if he were kept by the Israelis. And that's the thing that he was subjected to, by the way. And just a few moments later, his family told him that his mother died because of the lack of medications that Israel imposed in the Gaza Strip. And you didn't think about it, just like why Israel has been blocking medications from entering Gaza. What is the reason? What is the military objective that Israel wanted to achieve by blocking medications to the needy and the war-wounded people they have themselves wounded? And this has just transcended what a human being can imagine. Why those people are doing this? Why were we starved? Why were we absolutely going through all of this? There was no reason at all. And even the ceasefire they were talking about could have been achieved and agreed upon much, much earlier than that. And the thousands of people who have been killed and maimed could really be escaped. But Israel wanted to kill. Israel wants to kill every single one in Gaza just for the sake of killing, because it's just a murderous state. And it's not a state, it's a colony, of course, as I always say. And at the same time, Israel wants to destroy the entire Gaza Strip. That is the modus operandi of the Israelis since the very first day. But again, I would just reiterate something, that the Western media role has played this, or has been the most important factor in giving the Israelis the consent to continue the genocide in Gaza. And all of this could have been avoided if the Western media and the Western journalists really did their job. But they...
Are you still there, Abubaker? It's frozen. Let's hope he is well. I was going to make the point that hundreds of Palestinian journalists have been... Abubaker, my last question. Hundreds of your fellow journalists have been murdered in the last 15, 16 months. You are one of the last men standing. Everyone has to follow you and support your work. How can they do that? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I do digital reporting with Topside News, Electronic Intifada, and also the New Arab. I also do work with Press TV. I'm their TV correspondent on the ground. I have a Twitter page and a Substack page, Abubaker Abed. You can really find me. But what I need from people is to amplify the voices of the children, to take care about the children of Gaza. It's never about me. I'm just here to convey the message of my people. I would die for them. I would do everything and sacrifice everything for them. And I hope that the world will listen to the people of Gaza, will listen to the children of Gaza, because the mental toll on those children is staggering and is absolutely terrifying, and something that has to be treated very, very soon, because the children that I've been talking to cannot really absorb what they have been through. So I hope that the world will listen to the children of Gaza and help them as much as they can. That's my hope. The children of Gaza must be the news of the entire world.
Amen. Abubaker Abed, Palestinian journalist and commentator. I told you, a new star is born on the mother of all talk shows. Now, thousands of comments are flooding in on YouTube. Jacqueline Agnes Gilfillan says, Viva Abubaker, Viva Gaza. And Damascus sends $5 and says, always remember, Israel is not a nation. It is a military operation that began on November 2, 1917. Never underestimate the evil of Zionism. And Bobby says, many of us Americans are praying for the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. We love you. And Pauline Wooding says Israel isn't fulfilling their part of the deal. Where is all the aid and temporary housing? And Jorge Vidal says, Abubaker Abed, my hero, what an extraordinary human. Now, just before the break, a big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. Stephen Hay, Ron Grams, Solomon Yisa, and Ariel Arwen. Thank you very much, all of you. And I'm really going to make this point as firmly as I can. Every one of you has to go to MOATS.tv and donate something, even if it is £1, even if it is $1, €1. Nothing comes for free. 2 shows a week cannot be produced for free. We need every person watching to donate at least £1, $1, €1. I can't put it more clearly than that. Let me take a quick break and then your calls right up until the hour. Stay tuned.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Now, make sure you download this week's podcast. We're in the top 20 this week in Singapore and the United Arab Emirates over the last few days. And we're in the top 30 in South Africa and Israel. You can get the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. And of course, you can listen to the weekly podcast via the MOATS.tv website when you're there making your donation. Paul in Ottawa in Canada is the first up, and he wants to talk about Palestine. Who wouldn't after what we've just heard? Go ahead, Paul.
I'm here. Are you there?
Yes, the whole world is listening. Go ahead, Paul.
Right on. We're all here because we're not all there. All right. So I went to Israel in 1990. 89, right into 90. The world was going to be peaceful. The wall was coming down. I really felt a lot of peace. And I met a lot of people that went to Israel and they went to kibbutzes. And they were like, oh, you got to go to a kibbutz. And I went. And I have to say, they treated me very well. And I kind of listened to what they were saying. And they were, the kibbutzniks that I was with, they call them kibbutzniks. And they said, oh, yeah, no. We want the occupied territories, we give them back, and this and that, and yada, yada, yada. But there was a fear there was this, we're afraid of the Palestinians. And I'm like, well, why are you afraid of, they want to kill us all. And it was this propaganda that was just being perpetuated. And I found that the Palestinians were, well, it's not I found it, they were lesser than where the Israelis were at in their mindset. And the mindset, oh, well, they were more technologically advanced. The kibbutzes were working well. And my belief at that time was, wow, they could show the Palestinians how to bring themselves up and even become better and better. And that was what the Palestinians should learn from the Israelis. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand that what you're saying is arrant Orientalist nonsense, of course. I understand that you're paean of praise to the kibbutz, which is a settlement established on somebody else's land, stolen from them, agreeing to share their spoils equally with each other. The idea, how dare you, that these people who came from New York to occupy agricultural land had anything to teach the Palestinians who had been tilling that land for millennia is arrant Orientalist nonsense. And you say that they were afraid, Paul. They were right to be afraid. If I were to break into somebody's house and proceed to live in it, sending them out to live amongst the trash cans at the back of the house, I'd be afraid of them too. I'd be afraid that one day they'd break in through the window and murder me because I'm living in their stolen house and I've sent their family to live in the backyard in the rain. So there's nothing irrational about a thief feeling insecure, afraid of the people from whom he's stolen everything. That's absolutely rational. Last word to you, Paul.
So please forgive me for my ignorance back then. I was a young man. And I thought, and you know what thought did? Thought stuck a feather in the ground and thought he'd grow a chicken. I thought, no. I believe in bringing humanity up. And in my naivety, I thought, no, the Israelis are kind of on the right side. Now, it took me about 5 years to finally figure it out that, wow, these guys are insane. They are not just colonialists. They're really bad. And I want everybody to know out there that Israel has no. I can't believe I did that. And I want everybody to know out there that you can change your mind. It doesn't matter. When your eyes open, please open your eyes.
Yeah.
And,
very well said.
Please.
I forgive you, Paul. Please consider my earlier admonition to have been a premature ejaculation. Rashid in Indiana wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, Rashid.
Hello, George. Thank you. Thank you very much. And my hat to that young man. He reminds me, I'm originally from Algeria. I lived the French War. But my question right now, on this century, after the outrageous thing, the inconceivable thing that Trump has said in owning Gaza, is like, didn't echo much on a lot of ears. My question is, where is the almost 2 billion Muslims? They don't need arms. They only need to be together and do something to stop this madness. I mean, where are the Christians who used to run for tsunamis, used to run for, earthquakes. This Gaza, it's under rubble. Children in the cold. What is the heart of the humanity? How come a human being can sleep at night and have a heated house and see children, wounded, women hungry in the cold, and no rush for blankets, no rush for tents, and the hypocrisy of the Muslims, the hypocrisy of the Christian, the hypocrisy of the Jew, the Judaism of the religion, the hypocrisy of the Buddhist, and hypocrisy of every peaceful religion. Jesus, what he said, people are talking about it, but they're not following what he said. He said, I'm the way, the only way. Are they following his way? In Islam, the same thing, talking about the orphan, about wrongdoing of the Muslims. I don't blame Trump. I don't blame the apartheid state of Israel. I blame not the leader of the Muslims themselves. They're not protesting in their own country against their own leaders for not speaking up on their name. And any other places in the world who are allowing that to happen to humanity in this century. I am appalled. I mean, I don't understand if really we are in the Old West. Outlaw, there is no laws. What world is going to have our children coming into? Can you have children? Don't you worry about your kids? What's going to happen? I mean, this is absurd. I cannot even kill a roach. I mean, I lived in the war. I
mean, Rashid, very, very powerful call. I couldn't better it, so I'm not going to try to. A brilliant call from Rashid in Indiana. And a rare sighting these days, it's Simon from Weaponized News. He's back, and he's on Ukraine. Simon, very, very welcome.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. My apologies for my enforced absence. But whilst the world was entertained, quite rightly so, with the comings and goings at the Munich Security Conference, in particular, of course, the speech given by jdvance, the very next day, there was a telephone conversation between the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. The Americans put out a very short readout, courtesy of one of their spokespeople, and the Russians only put out a slightly longer version. And whilst the two weren't actually contradicting each other, it's the Russian version that has some incredible information in it, if it is indeed to be relied upon, which I appreciate people have different views upon. So if I may, it's only 3 paragraphs, and I'll quickly read through it to you. And you and your audience, I'm sure, will find key sentences in it that link to the true meaning and history of the word rapprochement. So it goes as follows. On February the 15th, at the initiative of the American side, Foreign Minister Lavrov had a telephone conversation with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Building on the February 12th telephone conversation between the presidents of Russia and the United States, the two foreign ministers agreed to maintain an open channel of communication to address long-standing issues in the Russian-American relations. Their goal is to remove unilateral barriers inherited from the previous American administration that have hindered mutually beneficial trade, economics, and investment cooperation. Both sides expressed a shared commitment to engaging on key international issues, including the situation in Ukraine, developments in Palestine, and the broader Middle East, as well as other regional matters. The conversation also covered ways to swiftly reverse the restrictions on Russian diplomatic missions in the United States, which were introduced by the Obama administration in 2016 and led to reciprocal measures. It was agreed that the expert-level meetings will be organised in the near future to coordinate specific steps towards removing these obstacles to the functioning of diplomatic missions in Russia and the United States. Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Rubio reaffirmed their readiness to restore a respectful and constructive interstate dialogue in line with the approach set by their presidents. They agreed to maintain regular contact, including discussions on preparations for a potential high-level Russian-American summit. And that's the end of it.
It's powerful. It's very powerful. And we know now that in Saudi Arabia, the first encounter will take place. It's not really clear yet, I think deliberately unclear, whether that encounter will involve Trump and Putin or their top officials. What can you tell us about that?
That meeting is due to start tomorrow, Monday, in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be attended by the US Secretary of State, who's already in the Middle East. He was in Israel today making some quite extraordinary statements alongside Netanyahu. And there will also be Mr. Witkoff, who seems to be becoming the roving personal representative of President Trump in all matters, not just in relation to Gaza. Apparently there's quite a lot of real estate in the world yet to be developed. And also Mr. Waltz, the new American National Security Advisor. They're going to be meeting with a bevy of representatives from the Russian Federation, including Mr. Narishkin, who for quite some time was the head of the successor to the KGB. And interestingly enough, Mr. Lavrov will not be in attendance on this occasion. But it's very, very clear that there is a grand master plan in mind, if not being implemented at this point. And it goes far, far beyond Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's the reason why little Zelensky isn't there, because Ukraine is only one of the items on the agenda. Finally, Simon, we can't let you go because we're so glad to hear from you again. The impact of Vance's speech, lecture really, was a devastating indictment on the European political class. What do you think will be the long-term impact of that?
I think the reason why it was so powerful was because even though it was not casting any of the blame upon the United States, it did have a large element of truth in it. I found it interesting that Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister who spoke immediately after him, got a much larger final round of applause. And ironically, sir, as the point that you have so very well made in your opening monologue, the scheme to break China away from Russia or vice versa may actually play out in reverse due to the trade war. And as Wang Yi and many European observers have pointed out, the European Union is now being pushed closer to China.
Yes, let's hope so. Simon from Weaponized News, he's back. He's gone. Let's hope we hear from him regularly again, as once we did. Is Zelensky finished? Yes or no? Almost 30,000 people have now voted. Get your vote in the next 40 minutes on Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. Coming up is a candidate in the German election. He's a human rights lawyer, a political researcher in international law at the University of Hamburg. He's a top man. I can vouch for that. And I was right about Abubaker. I'm right about Bijan Tavasolli, who'll be up right after the break. Stay tuned. I don't believe that the mainland European countries give a toss about Britain. And I'm certain that the United States would not sacrifice itself for Britain. That's why I say Britain is completely marginalized. As for the Trident missiles, of course, if the United States, which has dual control over these missiles, gave permission for them to be launched, of course, they would incinerate Russian cities. But what good would that do us? Because we'd all be dead, including the people that fired the missiles. You feel me?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A record audience for the mother of all talk shows tonight. We keep making and breaking our own records, but I can tell you this is the largest live audience that we have ever played to. So thanks very much, every single one of you, for joining us. And go after the show to moats.tv and leave at least $1, €1, £1. Bijan Tavasolli is a candidate in the German election, which is shaping up perhaps to be the most important general election ever. And we thought we should give you the benefit of his experience and wisdom as a candidate in Hamburg in this election. Bijan, thanks for joining us. It's very close to polling day now. The main parties, if I can call them that, have effectively lost the right to govern. Scholz and Baerbock are at each other's throats. They are increasingly frantic. Baerbock especially, I'm expecting to see foam coming out of her mouth at some point before polling day. The AfD leader has just reiterated that their policy is peace with Russia and an end to the sanctions which have harmed only Germany and not Russia. I'm a supporter, as are you, of Sarah Wagenknecht. You're a candidate for her. How are the runners and riders in this contest currently looking from your perspective?
So first of all, thanks for having me, George. It's an honor to be on the mother of all talk shows in this election campaign. It is the shortest election campaign that Germany has ever seen, because obviously the election was called after the Liberals left the government. The finance minister was fired by Olaf Scholz. And right now, the claims about so-called foreign interference are filling the newspapers here and the public radio stations, who are enraged about Americans that are, taking part in this election. But some of the politicians that claim that this is a diplomatic incident when the Vice President of the United States voices his opinion in Munich, well, some of them were campaigning for Kamala Harris in the United States just a couple of months ago. So this is an interesting situation. Everyone in the political establishment is nervous and they're extremely enraged at the comments, at the outspoken comments of jdvance. Some are even calling for an end to the transatlantic partnership. But I cannot tell you that what jdvance said was wrong, because he said there is no democracy right now in Europe, especially in Germany. There's no freedom of speech. And the Europeans have to change that, because their greatest enemy is not Vladimir Putin. It's not Russia. Their greatest enemy is that they're destroying their continent all by themselves. And I can really, even if I wanted to, I could not find any way to object to that, because I have lived through that experience since the COVID pandemic, since my anti-war efforts against the war in Afghanistan, where Germany took part in, I have had numerous libel suits, civil suits, and also penal suits for just the things I said, the critical political statements I made. And you've just said that I was nominated as a candidate here by the party of Sarah Wagenknecht. I'm not a member of this party, but when the local members asked me and unanimously nominated me to run for parliament, I said, yeah, this is a situation where we have to stave off maybe nuclear war, so of course I'll do it. And following your example, I think you ran for the Socialist Workers' Party at the time of the Iraq War, even though you were not a member. You were the only one who got elected to parliament, if I remember correctly. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna run for this party. And what happened was that just now the government claimed that I'm not allowed to run. And we really, really made sure to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And the paperwork, we filed it correctly. It is impossible to describe this in any other way than to say that there really is no democracy in Germany. Some of my friends said, yeah, but did you expect that the deep state would let you win, that they would actually let you sit in parliament? I said, well, I didn't know, but I thought they'd at least let me run, put my name on the ballot, and they're trying. My team is still trying. We're in court. We're trying to get this sorted out. But as it stands right now, an opposition voice will not even be on the ballot in my city of Hamburg.
Well, nobody can dispute Vance's central argument that freedom of speech in Europe, and in particular in Germany, has been slaughtered. I mean, no one could dispute that. If we had enough time, we could go through 100 examples. The threats against Musk for allowing dissident voices, the banning of TV stations, and the driving out of dissident voices from the public square and so on are too many to adumbrate. No one can dispute that the European Union sabotaged, wrecked, cancelled the elections in Romania, for example, because they were afraid of the guy who was set to win, because he had a different point of view to them. And then they said, well, we might, and they had earlier said, when Meloni was elected in Italy, that we have the tools to deal with an outcome that we don't like. Von der Leyen said that. Are they preparing their toolkit for the outcome in Germany? You say they're all very nervous. What might they do if the worst outcome emerges and Germany withdraws from the war party? Germany declares peace with Russia. I know it's a terrible vista I'm asking you to look at, but that is a possible outcome of this election. What will they do if that happens?
Well, if you ask the people of Germany, then a clear majority has been against German participation in this war. A clear majority has been against arming Ukraine to the teeth. This is, in a democracy, that would be reason enough for the government to stop this war. But as jdvance has said, Germany is currently not a democracy, and the government, the establishment, is planning on sabotaging the election, and they do not accept the results of the popular vote. What they are saying is, for example, the AfD, which, as you correctly pointed out, is very much against the Ukraine war. If this party gains a number of seats in parliament, then they will be excluded from any deliberations, and their vote will basically not count, because they will just make the other votes count. Like, even if they get like 30 or 40% of the votes, the other establishment parties have agreed that they should not count those votes. They will be voting in advance amongst themselves, like a cartel, basically. You know, so obvious, and most people are annoyed. The idea is to get the voters so fatigued and desperate that they don't even go to the vote, because then they don't have to manipulate the election results. But if you do it too much, it's not good for the public image. But this is something that I think particularly Americans, they find it hard to believe, because they thought that Germany was a democracy. So jdvance, who has just been in office for, well, basically a month, he has been receiving briefings. I can imagine. I feel pity actually for the people at the State Department and the CIA who had to brief him and tell him, they are not going to win. He said, "Yeah, you think they're right-wing extremists, but that's the same thing you said about Trump and the MAGA movement, and we won, right?" And I said, "No, in Germany it's different." And Elon Musk, jdvance, they all seem to believe that the AfD has a real chance at getting into government. While the truth on the ground is that there are so many institutions in Germany built up, amongst others, by the United States and Great Britain after the war, to prevent a right-wing populist party from ever coming to power, that it's basically impossible. The Constitutional Court, the Secret Services, Internal Services, they are all working against this. So it's not hidden that we have a deep state that is working against it. It's doing it out in the open. And that's why they're so angry that the Americans are now criticizing this.
Well, so much for a right-wing populist party. What about a left-wing populist party? What about Sarah? How is she doing? How is her campaign going?
Well, we have been sabotaged at basically every step of the way. And as you know, it is very difficult to build up a new party from the ground. She did that in record time, even though the media, the establishment, they were all fighting her and painting her in the worst colors, calling her a racist and Putin, like a stooge for Putin, things like that. And recently, they have not really covered the party at all. That's what they're trying to do, because, to be honest, the corporate media, they prefer a right-wing extremist party because they think they can control this party. And what we're seeing now is that the AfD is the most Zionist party in the German parliament. They have supported basically every move in the Likud government. And this is something they emphasize because it distances them from the neo-Nazi past of the German right-wing parties, who were obviously very much anti-Semitic. But even that, Alice Weidel, in her talk with Elon Musk, has claimed that Adolf Hitler was a communist. And what they are doing is they are saying that Germans are not anti-Semitic. Never. It's just the foreigners that come here. And then they're even rewriting the past. They started by saying, today there's no one in Germany that would do something against Jews. It's only the foreigners. They're barbarians. We should just deport them. Then everything is solved. We have no racism and no anti-Semitism. Then they started saying that, actually, we never had a history in Germany that was problematic. And they're trying to paint Adolf Hitler as some kind of, Muslim, Arab extremist, and communist. And this is ridiculous. This is I don't have to tell your viewers that, but some people who have no education about history, they might fall for these lies.
They need to be particularly stupid to fall for that one. Lastly, Bijan, can I safely predict that I'll never have to look on Anna Baerbock as your foreign minister again? Surely the Greens and Olaf Scholz are going to be smashed?
Well, I'd love to tell you this. Baerbock is not the head of the Green Party anymore. She's not on the top of their list. It is Habeck, but they have not been diminished in the polls at all. And there is a real chance that the current minority government will just be supplanted by the Conservative Party, forming like a all-encompassing party that will continue the war, because the frontrunner, MOATS, he has criticized the new administration in America because they are not willing to force Putin out of Ukraine. So he wants to send more weapons. And that has been his campaign. He has not emphasized that so much because he knows that it's unpopular, but he's the frontrunner currently for being the next chancellor of Germany, with policies that the majority in Germany does not want at all. And that is why people are
that would be
getting
a
angrier and angrier.
Uni-party government. That would be a real uni-party government, wouldn't it?
Yes. And it would possibly lead to, further destruction of democracy in Germany, because after that, then, the only opposition to that would be would gain a lot of new members and supporters. And after the next election, what will they do? If already all the parties are coming together, then it's going to be over. And the problem is that there's some racist elements in Germany that are being strengthened by the media. This whole thing of saying that it's the Muslims' fault. Every attack, every crime that we see in Germany is the Muslims' fault. That is something that the media is pushing right now, because the dire economic situation that we have as a result of this terrible war and the loss of our industrial capacity in Germany, that is something that they don't want to talk about, because the conclusion would be that we should end the war immediately. And so I don't think that the new government in Germany will take a long time to form a government. So Olaf Scholz will stay on for many months, I believe, and the same has to be said, sadly, for Annalena Baerbock. But this government, I fear that they will not be doing much. We have to hope that Washington, that the new administration there, people like Tulsi Gabbard, who has been confirmed as Director of National Intelligence. And, I think I'm filling in today for George from Hungary. I've had many discussions on RT International and other chains with him and Tulsi Gabbard. She's like, I think, the only person who ever called me a NATO spokesperson, which the moderators on RT were quick to correct her on. But I'm hoping for the best. And it is interesting to see in Germany how the transatlantic elites.
So are we all, now that we've heard you.
But
Bijan
the transatlantic elites
Tavasolli
used to get their orders from DC. Now they are getting orders in different directions. And they don't know what to do.
It's a new world.
That is my hope.
It's a new world, that's for sure. How many years we've spent hoping for a German uprising against diktat by Washington. And it turns out that Washington is right and Europe is wrong. You couldn't make it up. Bijan Tavasolli, human rights lawyer, political researcher in international law at the University of Hamburg. Thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a quick break. Then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri and the social media roundup. Stay tuned.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it. half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
"32,000 people have voted on the poll. Is Zelensky finished? Yes or no?" You've got 15 minutes to get your vote in. On Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. On my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. Let's go to the calls. The legend that is Sarkar in Glasgow on Ukraine. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Thank you so much, George. In fact, I must tell you something, George. I call myself as an angry man because for the past 3 years, every time when I thought that Zelensky cannot go any lower, lo, behold, he finds a way to surprise us, and I won't say pleasantly. I must tell you something, George. What annoyed me the most after jdvance's speech, when they literally humiliated, rightly so, exposed all the hypocrisy of the European leaders, this guy Zelensky then comes on to give his spiel to say that he wants a European army. Many years ago, this was called a fruitcake idea. People were chastised, mocked when people said that the EU and all these people had dreams of European army. But Zelensky openly said that he wants a European army. Now, I couldn't care less whether Zelensky stays in Ukraine or not as long as the war stops. What I feel angry is this guy's country is not even a part of EU because the EU did not want to include them for their corruption. And we, as British people, we voted for Brexit almost 9 years ago. We left the European Union. If there's a European army, first of all, why should Zelensky and Ukraine have their say in deciding whether there should be a European army or not to prolong the war, more massacre, more bills, more common people dying and suffering the consequences? And we as British people, why should we, who left the European Union, be a part of the circus? Why is it so hard to understand, George, that stopping a war saves more lives than fighting a war? I'd like to hear your views, George, as to what the British people should do.
Well, you have summarized the views of all right-thinking people, I would say. He went further than calling for a European army. He said he's going to create his own NATO in Ukraine. These kind of provocations can only lead to the failure of the Trump peace initiative and the fighting of the war to the bitter end. There are only two possible outcomes to this war. One of them is a negotiated settlement, and the other is a complete Russian victory on the battlefield. These are the only two possible outcomes. Anyone who believes that Keir Starmer, in this emaciated, septic isle, is going to fight Russia and prevail, belongs in the same ward in Broadmoor that I think will be the final resting place of Keir Starmer himself. Comments have been flooding in tonight. Kilo 1KO, Kilioko. NATO is a business and Ruta is the CEO. Without a Russian enemy, NATO can't exist. Anthony Tripp says Zelensky is crying all the way to the Swiss bank. I've got to tell you, him and his missus have just touched down in the UAE. They get about, don't they? Lucy Hearn says America doesn't respect international law. It would never go to war for a NATO ally unless it wanted to. Don't trust America or apartheid Israel because they don't honor agreements. And Colin Six-Hitter says Zelensky needs to wake up, stop demanding a seat at the surrender table and start running. It never goes well for the patsy. And Ricky Cook says this proxy war is not ending anytime soon. The US will keep funding this war. Let's go back to Canada, Toronto, where Alex wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, George. Alex from Toronto, formerly from New York.
Hi.
First, I just want to compliment you on the great guests you have, Tavasolli and the young man Abed, who I've heard before on the Electronic Intifada, who just give you incredible insight. And he reminded me of the trouble I'm having in Canada and the U.S. because even though I've been to Israel, I speak to Israelis and Palestinians. They're all quite aware of the fact that Israel is an apartheid state rather than a liberal democracy. Yet the majority of people in Canada and the United States today, when I say that Israel is an apartheid state, they immediately have their bristles up. They get a little upset. They're going, how can you say such a thing? And I never hear it on mainstream media. Not even once do they refer to Israel as an apartheid state. I hear them refer to Israel as a democracy, as the only democracy in the Middle East.
Only democracy,
yeah, until we break through that barrier, when people just realize that it's an apartheid state, it changes the narrative. Because right now, in this dystopian society, when I say Israel is an apartheid state, I'm called a racist. I'm called, because I'm against apartheid, I'm called an anti-Semite. And I'm not sure how can we possibly change this narrative.
Well, just by trying water wears away stone, as you know, we have no alternative but to try, Alex, and box better and more cleverly. We have to choose our words carefully. We have to prosecute our case powerfully, and we have to keep on doing it. We mustn't be afraid. If my children can do it, if my children can tell their classmates, no, I will not go into McDonald's because they are supporting the killing of children in Gaza. If my children can do that, and they're very small children indeed, so can everyone watching this. You know, I'm so old, I was often on the receiving end of similar brickbats when I was arguing against the original apartheid state in South Africa. People would call you very bad names indeed for standing outside the fruit shop, asking people to boycott South African fruit and so on. And the campaign to bring down apartheid was successful in the end, but it took a long time coming. And it was a very bitter struggle. And this one, for a variety of reasons, is even more bitter. But we are winning. There are more people on our side today on this question than have ever been. Trust me on that. Who better than I to know that after 50 years in that struggle? I can tell you that the support that we have today is immeasurable. It is by an order of magnitude, exponentially greater today than it ever has been. But you're right, some real citadels, fortresses of power and influence are yet to fall. Social media is controlled by people who support apartheid Israel. The mainstream media, such as it is controlled by people who support apartheid Israel. There's two pretty big barriers against our final victory, for sure. And also, there are people who don't do our cause any good, who allow a conflation to be made between the kind of murderous mayhem that we saw in Austria yesterday, where a Syrian fanatic murdered a little boy and then sat on the steps with a grin on his face He is a supporter of the ISIS Al-Qaeda group that is now, for now anyway, in control in Damascus. You would have thought that he would have left the Austrian people alone and gone back to torture his own people in Syria, but that's not what he did. And so for a lot of people, the Palestine cause equals Arabs, equals Muslims. The correlation between Arab, Muslims, and the kind of terrorist atrocity committed by these fanatic extremist organizations, this damages us. There are also people who are anti-Semitic. I block them every day. I had no idea, I'll be perfectly honest with you, that there were so many actual, literal Nazis alive and kicking in the world today. And they've all got a Twitter account. When I come across them, of course, I block them. The existence of that kind of element, of course, harms us. It harms the Palestinian cause. But that young boy that you just heard tonight, Abubaker Abed, how perfect, how pure was he? He is the face and the voice of Palestine. Matt in Portland on Trump. Up next, Matt, what would you like to say?
Well, I want to bring up this whole thing about what's going on in Ukraine. Well, for some reason, Trump isn't trying to end the war. He wants to put a freeze and rearm and keep the conflict going. Brian Berlectic has talked about this on his channel. He talked about it with Andre and other people. Also, here's the problem. Zelensky, as Russia has said over and over, is not the president of Ukraine. They need to hold elections, elect a new president, and then remove the language in their constitution that he put in there saying we cannot sit down and end this conflict with Russia. Until they do that, this war cannot be ended. Trump he is not the president of Ukraine, so he cannot end it. Only Ukraine and Russia can end it, and that means hold new elections, remove the part where they said we cannot sit down and negotiate the end of this war with Russia. Once they get rid of that, they can end this war. Until then, the war will continue. And this is what people don't understand. And Putin has said this, and Lavrov, Maria Zakharova, all of Russia the government has said, Zelensky is not the president of Ukraine, so they cannot sit down and end this conflict. And they also have to get that wording out they put in there under him that says we cannot negotiate the end of this war. Until that's done, the war will continue. So Trump saying that I can end the war, he can't. He doesn't have the power to end it. It sounds nice. It sounds
yeah, he does have. He does. No, he does have the power, and you're being far too pedantic and schematic. If Trump tells Zelensky to get on a plane and come into exile in Florida, in his splendid beachfront home, paid for at our expense, Zelensky will have to do that. Wars don't end on some kind of legalistic interpretation of a law which effectively a martial law government passed. If Trump says to the power centers in Kiev, it's over, Zelensky, get out, the rest of you come up with a new name, and I'll negotiate an end to the war with Putin, and you can have your signature on the paper at the end of the conflict. If that happens, the war is over. If what you're saying is that Trump doesn't really want to end the war, well, I think you're wrong, but you might be right. I think you're wrong if you think it's a ruse, that they want to freeze the conflict and then rearm. Well, the words I think you used, I think you're wrong, but you might be right. The point about Trump is that no one knows, maybe not even him, exactly what he's going to do next. But I treat facts as they are accomplished on the ground. And the fact is that Trump is laying waste to the entire superstructure of Ukrainian war support, stopping financial aid, devastating the stooge Ukrainian civil society, the journalists, the magazines, the television, the filmmakers, everyone has been cut off by Trump. Trump is actually meeting Putin, talking to him on the telephone. Now, you may say that that's all a ruse. And you may be right, but I think you're wrong. Time will tell us what happens. But the idea that only Zelensky can win the war, I assure you, is completely fatuous. A big hello to everyone watching on TikTok. Keep hitting the like button. 42,000 of you have liked the show on TikTok so far. I do have another show. I travel to make it on Mondays. It goes out on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. and you can be on it, on the video wall. It's called Have It Out with Galloway. Here's how you can appear. Watch this. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Our good friend Dan Kovalik is my guest on Have It Out with Galloway. You can see it on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. on my YouTube channel. Let's go to a regular caller, always talk sense, Terence in Corby in England on Palestine. On you go, Tel.
Thanks very much, Mr. Galloway. Good evening. And what I saw today with that young Mr. Abed was 1,000 forests just blooming up, made my heart sore when I heard a little boy talking. I'm not one for tears, but Amen. a sheer joy. Secondly, my second is a question, really. Given I've studied a bit about America, even though I care more about Britain, obviously. My point is that if a military man, be they a humble private or a colonel, thinks that they're going to do something illegal, they can refuse. And I would have asked Mr. Ritter this, because I think the one part that Trump cannot do is send troops, because I think such is the spread of the truth about Palestine with BDS and everything in America now, and the kids on board there. I don't think he'd have a leg to stand on. I do agree somewhat with what you say. If he said, that's enough, Zelensky, get out, that would happen. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I think regarding putting troops on, or boots into Gaza, like the Argentinian Zionists have been doing, and all those from all over the world, and then flying back out to fight for an illegal occupation force, that's not going to happen with American troops, because I don't think that they would countenance another Vietnam. What say you, Mr. Galloway?
No, I agree entirely, and I said so on Wednesday. There is no possibility of Trump risking American boys in body bags and coffins returning to the US to build a Trump Tower in Gaza. The optics of that are as horrific as any optics in the Vietnam War, and optics are much faster and more colorful today than they were then. It took many days for atrocity black and white photographs to appear in printed newspapers back then. Now, in gory Technicolor, every dead American, every Black Hawk Down Mogadishu corpse being mutilated, American being dragged through the alleyways and so on. It's impossible. And therefore, ipso facto, Trump cannot own Gaza, because you cannot own somewhere if you don't control it. And he can't even begin to control it. So we're back where we started, that Netanyahu illegally occupies Gaza's air and sea, but not presently its land. The Palestinian resistance rearmed and reconstituted, and according to Blinken, as numerous as before October 7th, are still in amongst the rubble. So actually we have returned to the status quo ante, except hundreds of thousands of people are dead and many, many more mutilated and wounded. I don't know what's going to happen next, Terence, but I do know that the US Marines will not be wading ashore in Gaza. Well, Gayatri's arrived in the studio with the social media news roundup. What's happening, Gayatri?
Well, I think I can speak for the audience that we were all very happy to have Abubaker Abed on. He has proven to be very popular. God bless him. His testimony was extremely moving. Hilpi says, so moved by Abubaker's words and spirit. Such bravery and loyalty to the land and people will surely free Palestinians. God bless these biblical people. And what he described about the land is reflected in the Netflix series Mo. If you haven't watched it yet, do watch it.
We just finished the second series.
Very
beautiful.
Where he returns to the land. And it's the land that's so...
Not a dry eye in our house.
Oh,
Try it out.
No. It's something not a lot of people can relate to. That's how holy the land is to them. Samson loves you. He donated £50. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
He says, maintenance of the ceasefire in Gaza reinforces my hypothesis that Trump's outrageous statement on owning the Gaza Strip may be a negotiating tactic. Remembering he was going to rain fire and fury on the DPRK.
On the little rocket man.
Well, it ended up with...
You're going to blow him up, and they ended up the best of friends.
Exactly. Oh, what pictures resulted from that meeting?
I hope he meets him again, actually.
Well, wouldn't that be wonderful?
It was quite a nice chemistry between the two.
Yeah, this time a bit further into the land.
Go to Pyongyang, Donald. I recommend it. Big Dennis Rodman will take you there. But don't let him lead you into trouble.
Paul Brown is in Sheffield, and he says, some year ago, there was this famous photograph of President Reagan and Gorbachev having a friendly fire chat in Switzerland, the Fireside Summit in Geneva. It was coined as. It looked like a new era of peace and prosperity across the world. So what went wrong since? The US and the EU have since that date adopted an ever more hostile attitude to Russia. The US appeared to want a full-scale war against Russia when Biden was in the White House. Can anyone suggest a reason why this is desirable to even the most deranged of US politicians? What went wrong?
Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, what went wrong was that idiot sitting on the right with that blotch on his head had a blotch inside his head and gave away all kinds of things which set everybody in the world back many, many decades, maybe 100 years. Certainly the Russian people had the greatest fall in life expectancy in the whole history of the human race. The poverty and immiseration of the Russian people was accompanied by the large-scale theft of their national resources by private oligarchs, most of whom then took off and bought things and clubs and houses and businesses in the West and never came home again. Germany was allowed to reunify and become a clear and present danger to the security of the world. So that's the first thing that went wrong. But your correspondent is right in this regard. When Russia was a communist country, the Soviet Union was a communist country, there was an objective reason to hate them, to fear them, to think that they might be coming. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the death of communism in the Soviet Union, its breakup into small constituent parts, and the conversion of Russia to capitalism, there was no reason at all for Western European and North American capitalist countries any longer to hate Russia. European people, Christian people, anti-communist people, what's not to love from their point of view? But they didn't love them. They continued to hate them. They continued to shun them. They continued to keep them at arm's length to try and avoid any absorption of Russia into Western institutions, Western markets, and so on. And I don't know the answer to the question why about that.
What about that? Yes.
I've never understood it. I don't understand it.
Well, you say about that, he continues that at one point it was even suggested that Russia should join the EU. But this would have been a
Putin asked to join NATO and to join the EU. Why didn't they let him?
Because he would then, as Paul Brown puts it, become a rival, a big leader within the EU, a big rival towards the US as a European power.
But isn't that what they now are trying to do? They want Europe to be a rival to the American power. Imagine how much of a powerful rival it would be to America if Russia was in the EU. Imagine all that oil, all that gas, all those minerals, all those people, that military power, all that territory, the biggest country in Europe, the biggest country in the whole world in the European Union. Wouldn't that have been a sensible idea?
It would. Instead, they did the opposite, and NATO encroached closer and closer with all their military bases. So that's why we asked the poll tonight, is Zelensky finished? Olufemi Okinei says, the writing is on the wall for Zelensky. His days are numbered. He will not survive stepping down as president if he were to continue living in the country. If he has any luck, he will be able to get away with the loot. However, the long arm of justice and revenge from the grave will eventually catch up with him.
I suspect so.
As is the case with many puppets who lose, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Drones Toronto says, he was finished when he started. We all saw this. What a senseless waste of lives and resources, all to fill the coffers of those with no morals and who only profit from investing in a military-industrial complex. And finally, Vivian Stevens says, unfortunately, the UK is going down too. Successive governments since Thatcher have ruined our industrial capacity and ruined our economy with their forever wars. Julian Assange was right.
Well, he was right about a lot of things, and he was certainly right about that. More of that later. Chips?
Please.
Okay, let me take one last call, but before I do that, a big shout out to tonight's donors. In the last hour, Geraint Thomas, Patricia Leary, David Kidner and Rosanna Curry have been on the MOATS.tv website and donated. A big thank you to all of you. Please, every one of you, this is a record audience tonight. 60,000 live viewers tonight. 60,000. If every one of you give £1, the show will be secure for months to come. Isn't that a good thing? Don't you think we're worth £1, €1, $1? So go to the MOATS website, moats.tv, and donate, please, before the end of the evening. Last call, I suspect. No, let me read out the final vote. 33,795 people voted. On Twitter was the only place where Zelensky got a vote of confidence, and only by 55 to 45, and only in a 7,801 turnout. So by my reckoning, NAFO have got 4,000 people they can mobilize, but only on Twitter. Suspicious? I think so. On Telegram, it was 96% yes, he is finished. On the YouTube community poll, 92%. That he was finished, and on the YouTube stream, 94%. Only on Twitter did Zelensky get a vote. Just think about that. Thanks to everyone who voted, and thanks to Paul in Brighton, who is the last caller of the evening. On you go, Paul. What do you want to say?
Good evening, George. Well, it goes to prove how good you are.
Evening.
60,000 people tuning in. It'll soon be 60, well, maybe 6 million that are tuning. And hopefully the Workers' Party...
Until it is, I'll not be... I won't rest, Paul, until 1 million people are watching live and 10 million are watching on catch-up. That's my metric. But we're headed in that direction.
One thing we must do when the Workers' Party do get into government and do get into the Houses of Parliament, we must install a revolving door. That's one thing that must be done, just to get rid of all the rubbish and crap that's in there, let's be fair. Regarding Palestine will have their day and they will get their land back. Donald Trump, I do like him, but I think what he needs to do is make it right with Russia first and really support Russia, because they are the largest country in the world.
That's the most important thing.
Anyone. Yeah. That would be the first thing to do, is to shake hands with Russia. Maybe Russia can help us with Palestine. Maybe all he's got to do is ask. Everything is negative.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point, Paul. The Russians can be of assistance. I'll tell you what I think, Paul. You're not old enough to remember it, neither am I. But the summit in Yalta at the end of the Second World War, where Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin sat down and decided on a new course of action in world affairs, the United Nations and so on. The big three, as they were, are no longer the big three. So Churchill was there because he was Churchill and because of our role in the Second World War. Starmer won't be at the new Yalta, be sure. Nobody would know who he was if he turned up at the door. But China, Russia, and the United States have got to sit down in a proper summit meeting and sort out these extraordinarily dangerous turns of event that keep on happening and threaten the entire peace of the world. So a revolving door in Parliament, I'm fully with you. There is one, metaphorically, between the cabinet and the boardrooms, but we need one. A revolving door so that we can boot the backside of all these betrayers who are sitting in the House of Commons today. But a new Yalta is what I'm pushing for. The world needs it. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. It was a record-breaking show. 63,545 people are watching on all our streams live. And that will multiply and multiply and multiply over the next hours and days. And so we're looking, I think, at a record audience all round. With a bit of luck and God willing, I'll see you on Wednesday. Good night.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.